Hello, and welcome back to the Carbon Capture Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Piekarski, and today I am joined by Andrew Shaw, member of the public policy practice at Dentons. Welcome to the podcast, Andrew.
Well, thank you so much, Danielle. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We're happy to have you. So let's kick things off by having you tell us about yourself and Dentons.
Well, sure. And again, thank you for the opportunity. I'm a partner in the public policy practice, and I generally advise energy companies throughout kind of the sector, including oil and gas, renewable, public power companies, and even in the nuclear sector. Help them navigate the federal government, whether it be Congress, executive agencies like the Department of Energy, and the Environmental Protection Agency, and also help them deal with a variety of stakeholders, whether it be industry or non-governmental organizations. Dentons is one of the world's largest law firms. We continue to expand and are in, I believe now, over 80 countries. We have one of the world's largest global energy practices. And a significant foothold here in the U.S. As well.
Very interesting. So there has been a lot of momentum worldwide, especially in this past year in the CCUS industry. What have been the biggest inflection points to enable this momentum?
Well, I think there are a variety of inflection points that have gotten us to this current moment. You know, one is the reality of the challenge we face with respect to climate change. You can't turn on the news any day without hearing about extreme weather and hearing about the gap between where emissions are headed and where they need to be going to be able to mitigate the worst causes and worst repercussions of climate change. In that context, you have the need to do several different things. You know, one, continue to provide reliable and affordable energy to consumers and businesses across the world, and we've seen that be a particular challenge over the last year with the rise in energy prices, particularly oil and gas, stemming at least largely in part to the war in Ukraine. So you have a need to continue to providing this reliable energy, and you also have a variety of energy assets, particularly oil, gas, and coal, that are important to local communities, important to national economies. And I think there's a recognition of how you can use carbon capture and other technologies to be able to reduce emissions, but also keep these assets online, at least for a while, as we have this transition to a cleaner economy and a cleaner energy system. I think another one of the inflection points that we're seeing is an expansion and an increasing expansion of what carbon capture can mean. I think 10, 15 years ago, we were talking about carbon capture in the sense of using it primarily for enhanced oil recovery. But now we see companies looking at the utilization piece of CCUS. It's not just CCS anymore, it's CCUS, and being able to use carbon not as a negative economic issue, but rather taking carbon and using it in industrial processes, whether that be steel, cement, aluminum, where it has some value. And I think there's a lot of promise associated with that. And then I think finally, from my perspective here in the United States, there's been a lot of movement over the last several years, and in particular this year, with big pieces of legislation that have provided funding and certainty with respect to the carbon capture industry. And I think that's really exciting. And maybe just to briefly go into a couple of those bills, because I think they're really important to providing momentum here in the U.S., but I think that will have ramifications globally. One is the bipartisan infrastructure law, which has a variety of different programs to fund activities related to carbon capture. I think one of the most exciting of those programs is around $3.5 billion for direct air capture hubs. We saw DOE release an initial funding opportunity announcement, actually just a couple days ago this week, that will really kickstart the process for communities and companies to collaborate on being able to bring on board DAC projects over the coming years. And then, the other big legislative bill that has gotten over the finish line is the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed earlier this summer. And this bill, among other provisions, provides certainty with respect to what's called 45Q, which is the tax incentive here in the U.S. For carbon capture. And the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, did a variety of different things to make that tax incentive more valuable and more flexible. One, the IRA increased the value of the tax incentive, both for the carbon capture at point sources, but also direct air capture as well. It also made the tax credit more flexible, allowing for direct pay or a fully refundable tax credit to projects, and allowing those projects to transfer the tax credit to another entity. In addition, that tax credit is the thresholds to be able to qualify for that tax incentive are lowered, which expands, I think, probably significantly the universe of projects that can qualify for the tax incentive. And finally, and arguably the most important aspect of that of the IRA when it comes to the 45Q is there's a long-term extension. So you have an extension through the early 2030s, I believe 2032, for projects that commence construction. And so that long-term certainty is really important, and important for other clean industries as well, for other tax credits. But it allows, I think, projects to be able to leverage and be able to marshal capital to move into these projects.
Yeah, absolutely right. I'm so happy you brought up the DOE funding that was announced earlier this week. There was that, and there was also some funding from the Biden and Harris administration for carbon management. And the IRA did make that pool of projects so much more broad. So do you have any specific industries that have more momentum or opportunity, even advantages, than other industries to make progress?
Well, I think there's a lot of momentum in the direct air space right now. As I mentioned, the tax incentive here in the U.S. For direct air capture has been significantly retooled to make it, one, more valuable, and two, more accessible. And you have that tax incentive paired with this funding for DAC regional hubs under the infrastructure bill. And I think you see some real momentum for companies investing increasing amounts of capital in these projects, because one, they can be able to access, at least here in the U.S., some federal funding to de-risk the some of the capital investments, and two, they have the long-term certainty on the tax side. I think the other area that I see momentum, and I referenced it in the first question, is on the utilization piece. Again, I think there's a lot of potential value in turning a ton of carbon, a negative externality, into a valuable commodity that can be used in industrial processes. You see companies like Capital Power, based out of Edmonton, Alberta, working on that. And I think there's going to be a lot of exciting applications over the coming years.
For sure. So I saw in a paper of yours that you touched a bit on voluntary reductions. Could you tell us what are voluntary reductions and how they can benefit CCUS projects?
Sure. Well, a variety of different companies, kind of spanning the economy, have taken leadership in making pledges related to climate change. You see even oil and gas companies pledging that they are going to become net zero by mid-century. And so I think, particularly in the oil and gas space, I think these voluntary commitments are important in being able to marshal their investment, their focus, and their efforts into carbon capture. I think we will need, for the foreseeable future, some oil and gas, and being able to have technologies that we can use to reduce emissions is in the interest of that industry. And so I think the voluntary commitments that you see coming from that sector are encouraging in incentivizing their own efforts to bring online and commercialize more carbon capture technologies. I think more broadly speaking, for the economy and outside of the oil and gas space, the attention and leadership by companies in making these pledges, I think, is important. And because, again, while renewable resources will continue to play a larger role in our energy mix, we are going to need technologies like direct air capture and carbon capture to be able to meet our net zero goals by mid-century. And so that the efforts, particularly in the financial sector, I think can again, I think, marshal, private capital markets to move money into these projects.
Very interesting. So do you think we will see an increased political pressure on CCS projects moving forward?
Well, I think one of the exciting things working in DC for almost 20 years is that you do have a bipartisan consensus right now in support of carbon capture. You have folks like a climate hawk, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a Democrat from Rhode Island, working with Senator John Barrasso, a Republican from Wyoming, a huge coal producing state. And they have found areas of consensus to work on as it relates to carbon capture. And I think that'll continue going forward. I do think we've seen a period of significant, at least here in the U.S., significant progress when it comes to policy as it relates to carbon capture. I think that will likely continue, but I'm not sure that we're going to see the big legislative achievements in this space that we've seen over the last 2 years. But I think as more projects begin to come online and more specific policy issues come up, I think that provides an opportunity for that collaboration and consensus on making sure that we have the political environment necessary and the policy environment necessary for carbon capture projects to thrive.
Great. So going back to funding, do you expect the increase in funding for CCUS projects will translate to meaningful reductions in emissions?
Well, I think it has to.
Yeah.
We need. I strongly believe that this technology can and must play a role in helping us meet our net zero climate imperatives. I think we've seen a lot of positive momentum over the last couple weeks when it comes to the announcement of projects and the announcement of funding in this space. I do also think that the policy levers here in the U.S., principally through the tax code, have been made more valuable and more flexible. And I think that will significantly help carbon capture be a real and meaningful part of the toolbox in helping the U.S. and I think the world reduce emissions over the coming decades.
Great. Well, we are coming to our the end of our time here. So do you have anything else that you would like to add?
I just would say this is an exciting and dynamic space. It's going to be a busy couple years here in the U.S. Now that we've had some big pieces of legislation that have passed with implementing those pieces of legislation. The IRS is going to be focused on providing guidance to projects on implementing this revised 45Q tax incentive. And as we saw this week, the Department of Energy has a significant amount of funding that they're going to be putting towards direct air capture and carbon capture technologies and projects. And they're really just getting the ball rolling. So keep your eye on what's going on. It's going to be busy. And certainly, if Dentons or our team can ever be of assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, thank you again. We are joined by Andrew Shaw with Dentons. And thank you to our listeners. If you or your company is interested in recording a podcast, please contact Carbon Capture Magazine. And happy holidays. Take care until next time.